Night had no moon, only the lake, wide, still, black as ink, caught a faint light from the lanterns floating on its surface. The villagers of Shilan stood by the shore, silent, their faces pale under firelight. They called this place the Mirror of the Dead, a lake so still that the living could see who waited for them on the other side. Tonight, it was not a funeral. It was a wedding. The groom Han Wei adjusted his new silk jacket, his hands shaking. The bride Lin Hua walked behind him, dressed in crimson from head to toe. Her veil was heavy, made of real silk, embroidered with gold thread phoenixes. She looked like a wound that learned to walk. No one spoke as the old woman lit the lotus lanterns and pushed them into the water. "The lake must bless the union," she whispered. "Let the reflection be perfect, or the marriage will not last." The air was cold, sharp, and wet. Even the frogs were silent. When Lin Hua reached the edge, she hesitated. The hem of her red dress brushed the surface of the lake, the same place her cousin had drowned 2 years before. Her mother's hand twitched, wanting to pull her back, but the groom was already calling her forward. "It's just a reflection," he said, forcing a smile. "Just water." The villagers leaned in. The old woman began the chant, soft at first, then rising, syllables older than memory, words traded between monks and ghosts. The surface of the lake began to glow faintly, showing both of their faces in the reflection. But something was wrong. Only the groom's face moved. The bride's reflection stayed still, eyes wide open beneath the veil. Someone whispered, "She's not moving," but the sound died in their throat. The groom laughed nervously and lifted her veil. "Say the vow," he told her, "so the spirits can hear." Her lips parted. No sound. The chant faltered. The lotus lanterns flickered. And then from the middle of the lake, a single ripple spread outward, slow as breath. The reflection of the bride blinked. Han Wei froze. He looked down. His bride stood beside him, trembling, eyes closed. But her reflection stared straight up, her mouth moving silently underwater. It was mouthing words. The villagers backed away. The old woman dropped her incense bowl into the dirt. The lake began to speak. It wasn't a sound, more like a vibration, a hum inside the bones. The air thickened, smelling of wet iron and rotting lotus. Then beneath the veil, Lin Hua's body jerked forward. She gasped, clawing at her throat, water spilling out of her mouth, though she hadn't touched the lake. Someone screamed. Han Wei grabbed her shoulders. "Lin Hua! Lin Hua!" Her eyes snapped open, but they were not her eyes anymore. The pupils were pale, the whites clouded, like someone had drowned in them long ago. Her voice came, but it was not her voice. It was layered, many voices together, some young, some cracked with age. "You swore," it said. The reflection in the lake smiled, blood-red veil floating around her face like smoke. "You promised," it whispered again. The wind rose suddenly. The lanterns went out one by one, until only the water glowed faintly, a mirror of fireflies over black glass. Han Wei tried to step back, but something gripped his ankle, cold, soft, wet. He looked down. A hand, pale as wax, reaching up from the reflection, nails red as her dress. He stumbled, shouting. The villagers rushed to pull him back, but the hand dragged harder, pulling him down to the knees. Lin Hua screamed, or tried to, but her mouth opened wide and filled with water that wasn't there. The reflection beneath the lake was now smiling. Its red veil spread like ink through the water, wrapping around both of them. Then, without a sound, both bride and groom vanished beneath the surface. Only the red veil floated back up, curling like smoke in the dark water. When it touched the shore, it was no longer silk. It was flesh, soft, warm, still pulsing. The villagers ran. No one dared to look back. At dawn, the lake was perfectly still again, a mirror so calm it seemed to breathe. The only thing left on the shore was a single lotus flower, soaked in blood, and a faint voice whispering from beneath the water, "A promise is never buried. It only waits." The lake was quiet again. By morning, mist lay low across the water like a shroud. The villagers stood at the edge, their faces pale, their voices swallowed by the fog. They had dragged the nets through the water until their arms bled, but the lake gave nothing back. No bodies, no dress, not even a ripple. Only the faint scent of burned silk lingered, sweet and rotten, as if the air itself remembered the ceremony. By midday, the whispers began. Some said the couple had run away. Others swore they saw hands beneath the surface, reaching. A fisherman's wife claimed she heard the bride calling her name in the early dawn, soft, pleading from the water's edge. They laughed at her until they found the lotus petals on her doorstep still wet. That night, no one slept. The dogs barked at the lake, the windows fogged from the inside, and the sound of water, slow, deliberate dripping, echoed through every house, though the rain had not come for weeks. In the smallest house by the willow, the old woman who had led the ritual burned incense until the smoke turned black. Her hands trembled as she tied red thread around the window frames. "It's not the girl," she whispered to herself. "It's what she carried." Then she pressed her ear against the wall, and for the first time in her long life, the wall whispered back. 2 days later, the village elder ordered the water to be blessed. They brought a young monk from Kunming, a boy barely 20. He recited sutras at the shore while the villagers watched from a distance. The surface stayed still for an hour. Then the monk stopped. "What is it?" someone asked. He turned to them, face drained of color. "The reflection," he said. "It doesn't match." They leaned over the edge. The monk was right. The rippling surface showed the willow trees, the shore, the crowd of villagers, but not the monk himself. Where he stood in the reflection, the lake showed something else. A woman in a red dress, veiled, standing exactly where he was, staring back at them through the water. The monk dropped his prayer beads. The string snapped, and the beads rolled into the lake. The moment they touched the surface, the water froze solid. Then one by one, each bead cracked in half with a faint click, like tiny bones breaking. That evening, the wind changed direction. The smell of rot crept through the rice fields. Candles burned lower than usual, their flames bending toward the ground as if bowing to something unseen. Children began to wake in the night, screaming about the lady in the mirror. One boy, no older than 6, said she stood outside his window, her veil dripping water onto the sill. "She asked me," he said, "if I would keep my promise." His mother slapped him for speaking nonsense, but when she turned away, she saw her reflection in the mirror smile on its own. 3 nights after the wedding, the village gathered at the temple. Someone had found the groom's shoe tangled in reeds. The elder placed it on the altar beside a bowl of salt and muttered prayers for the dead. He asked the gods for protection, but the air inside the temple felt thick and wrong, as if something else was listening. The old woman stood in the back, clutching her rosary tight. "The vow was broken," she whispered, "and the lake remembers." Her breath fogged the glass of the shrine, and in that fog, faint letters appeared, drawn from the inside, as though by a finger tracing through the condensation. 4 characters in dark streaks, Bushoji Shur, the vow unkept. By the 5th day, the first body surfaced. A fisherman named Luo was found floating face down near the center of the lake. When they turned him over, his mouth was wide open. filled with lotus petals. His eyes were gone, replaced by two small mirrors, polished smooth. When they tried to remove them, the mirrors broke to dust in their hands. In the reflection of the broken pieces, the villagers swore they saw a woman standing behind them. Red veil, wet hair, no face. That night, the elder gathered everyone in his house and told them the truth. She was promised, he said, voice shaking. Before she married Han Wei, she was promised to another. When the floods came, her family broke the vow and sold her off. She swore she would never forgive betrayal. He looked toward the window where the mist pressed against the glass like a living thing. She kept her promise, he whispered, even in death. The village went silent. No one dared to speak her name again, but silence did not save them. At midnight, a sound came from the lake. A woman's laugh, hollow and distant, like wind echoing through a jar. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and for a moment, the surface showed not the sky, but the reflection of every villager standing on the shore, each one wearing a red veil. And then, just as quickly, the image was gone. Only the ripples remained, carrying a whisper that no one could forget. A promise made at the water's edge must be kept, or the lake will keep it for you. The morning after the second drowning, the fog did not rise. It clung. Mist drifted through the village streets like smoke from an unseen fire. The villagers spoke little now. They kept their mirrors covered with cloth, their windows sealed with talismans drawn in ink and chicken blood. Even the crows had fled the willow trees. Then at dawn, the sound of a bell echoed through the valley. Not the temple bell. This was smaller, thinner, carried by hand. It rang once, twice, then stopped. The sound didn't fade. It settled, like it had found the right place to sleep. The man who carried it came walking along the stone path from the mountain road, a figure in a dark traveling robe, broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He walked with no escort, only a cane carved with a pattern of intertwined dragons. Behind him, a single mule pulled a wooden chest wrapped in red cloth. The villagers followed him with their eyes, no one daring to speak first. At the old shrine near the shore, the man stopped. He knelt in silence before the altar, 3 sticks of incense between his fingers, and murmured something under his breath, the words too old for the villagers to understand. The old woman who had led the ill-fated wedding ritual recognized the gesture immediately. "He's a Fashi," she breathed, a Taoist priest, a walker between the veils. When he turned toward her, she saw his eyes, steady, black, unreadable, and bowed low. "They said you came once, years ago," she whispered, "to chase out a fox spirit in Tonghai." "I didn't chase it out," he said quietly. "It left when it found something worse." By noon, the priest had opened his chest. Inside were tools of his trade, a set of yellow talismans burned around the edges, a small bronze mirror, a string of wooden prayer beads, and an old bell carved from bone. Every item bore scorch marks, as if used against something that had resisted fiercely. He sat under the willow, laid the mirror flat on the earth, and began to chant. The villagers gathered in a half circle, keeping their distance. The priest's voice was low and even, the syllables rolling like waves against stone. The wind seemed to move with the rhythm of his words. The lake stayed still, too still, as though listening. After a time, he stopped and lifted the mirror to his face. The villagers saw his expression change. He frowned, not in fear, but in recognition. "What do you see?" someone whispered. He turned the mirror toward them. At first, it reflected only the lake. Then slowly, the image shifted, showing a woman in a wedding dress standing beneath the water, her veil flowing like seaweed. Her head tilted, her mouth moved soundlessly. And though no sound came, Everyone felt her words as pressure in their chest. "She's calling someone," the priest said softly, "calling for the one who broke his vow." That night, the priest stayed in the empty house near the shore. The old woman brought him rice and salt. He placed both in bowls and left them by the window. "She comes with the mist," he told her. "If you hear the water move, do not open your eyes." He sat cross-legged beside the mirror until the candles burned low. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of wet lotus. Then the sound began. Faint footsteps on the roof, slow and dragging. Water dripped between the ceiling boards. The mirror trembled once. The priest opened his eyes. She was there, not in the room, but in the reflection. The red veil drifted behind her face pale as river clay, her hair floating in slow motion, as if time itself was submerged. "Who bound you here?" he asked quietly. "Speak." Her head twitched, and her voice came as a whisper through the sound of water. "He promised. He lied. He gave me to the mirror." The reflection darkened. Behind her, more figures appeared. Women, all wearing red, their faces half dissolved in shadow. Dozens, maybe more. The priest's hand tightened on his beads. "You are not alone," he said. "You are part of a chain." The figures turned toward him. The water in the mirror rippled, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of breathing, but not his. Breathing from the walls, the floor, the wood itself. Then the whisper changed. It grew closer, layered, wet. "You walk the line between, but promises bind you too." The candles went out. The mirror shone with its own light, a cold, moonless glow. The priest's reflection began to distort. The water's image pulled his shape downward, stretching his face into something unrecognizable. He steadied his breath and struck the bone bell once. The sound rang sharp, slicing through the air like steel. The reflection froze. For a moment he saw her clearly. The drowned bride, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. And in her hand, she held something small, a folded paper charm, soaked and torn. She pressed it against the inside of the mirror, as if handing it to him from the other side. When he reached for it, the mirror cracked. The sound was like a scream swallowed by water. The priest jerked his hand back. The paper was in his palm, but it was dry. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a name, not the groom's, not the bride's, his own. Dawn came gray and thin, as if the sky itself were afraid to look directly at the lake. The priest sat cross-legged beneath the willow tree, the cracked bronze mirror beside him, and the slip of paper, the one with his name, resting in his open palm. He had not slept. The night had stretched itself into something without shape or mercy. When the first rooster crowed, he heard it echo underwater. He studied the charm again. It was written in black ink. The calligraphy faded, trembling. A woman's hand. 3 lines of invocation. A promise, a name, a curse, and below it, the red fingerprint of a vow sealed in blood. "To the mirror I bind him. If he breaks his word, let the water claim him." His name beneath. The old woman returned with morning incense, her face drawn, her eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. She saw the charm and gasped. "Master Lu," she whispered, "that mark, it's from our temple. From the mirror oath." Lu raised his head slowly. "Tell me." She hesitated, hands shaking as she lit the sticks of incense. The oath was old, before our time, before even the monks came from Kunming. In the old days, when a man swore to protect or to wed, he stood by this lake. The bride would hold the mirror, the groom the lotus. Their reflections joined first, before their bodies. The lake was the witness. And if the vow was broken, her eyes filled with something like pity. The mirror would remember, and the water would come to collect. By midday, Lou walked the shore with his staff, reading the symbols etched into stones buried half in mud. He brushed away moss and saw the faint carvings. Two mirrored characters, ancient seal script, truth kept, lie drowned. He traced them with his thumb, feeling the grooves still wet, as if carved yesterday. The lake's surface rippled, though there was no wind. He turned, scanning the bank. "There's something buried here," he murmured, "a place where vows were made, or broken." The villagers followed at a distance, watching him dig with the end of his staff until the wood struck metal. A dull, hollow clang. They unearthed an old basin, bronze, tarnished green, shaped like a mirror without glass. Lotus patterns wrapped its rim. The bottom was filled with black water that refused to pour out. When Lou tilted it, the reflection inside stayed still, unmoving, a second lake trapped within. "This is the altar," he said quietly, "where the oath began." At dusk, he lit candles around the basin and placed the cracked mirror beside it. The air grew thick with humidity and the smell of lotus root. He scattered salt in a circle and began his incantation. His voice was measured, precise, ancient words that had outlived the dynasties that birthed them. The villagers knelt behind him, their faces bowed. The surface of the water began to move, not from his breath, but as if stirred from below. Whispers rose from it, low and wet, overlapping like wind through reeds. Dozens of voices, male and female, old and young, crying, laughing, chanting. He listened, trying to find one among them. Then he heard her. "Lu Chen, you left me here." His breath caught. He had not spoken his family name in years. The reflection changed. It showed not the lake, but a memory. A temple courtyard lit by lanterns and rain. A younger man stood before a bride in red, her veil dripping, his hand trembling as he poured water into the basin between them. "I will return," he said. "I swear it." Then the vision shattered. The whispers became screams. The candles blew out. The old woman cried out, clutching her beads. "Master Lu, she knows you." The priest knelt, gripping the edge of the basin as the black water boiled, releasing the stench of decay. "I know," he said through clenched teeth, "because I made the same vow." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small jade token, cracked in half, its other piece long missing. "I was bound to her family, a promise to protect the daughter until her marriage. When the war came, I fled the province. The bride drowned the night I left." He looked at the basin. "I thought she was just another lost spirit, but she remembers the broken word." The lake roared, a sound deep and terrible, like breath under ice. Water surged from the basin, spilling across the ground, crawling toward him like a living thing. Within it, faces formed, women with eyes wide open, their mouths mouthing the same word. "Promise?" Lou raised his staff and pressed its base against the earth. The salt ring burst into blue fire. The spirits recoiled, their forms twisting into vapor. He shouted the closing incantation, forcing the water back into the basin. The glow of the mirror dimmed. The voices faded. Then, just as silence returned, the reflection shifted again. Not a woman this time. A man. Han Wei, the groom. He was standing waist-deep in the lake, eyes blank, holding the red veil in his hands. He turned toward Lou, and in the mirror his mouth moved. "She waits for you too." The image dissolved. The basin cracked, and from beneath the ground came a hollow sound, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing from under the earth. The villagers fled. Only Lou stayed, staring at the black basin steaming before him, its water gone. He whispered to himself, "She doesn't want revenge. She wants the vow completed. The willow branches swayed though there was no wind, and in their rustle, a woman's voice answered, soft as breath over a grave. Then keep your word, Walker, or drown with the rest. Night fell like a bruise across the valley. The fog had thickened until it was no longer air but fabric, heavy, wet, and suffocating. Lanterns barely cut through it. Their light trembled like candle flames trapped underwater. The villagers no longer stood near the lake. They watched from the hill, their fear shaped into silence. Down by the shore, Master Lu prepared the ritual. He had drawn the 8 trigrams on the earth in ash and salt. At its center, he placed the bronze basin, still cracked from the day before. Around it, he lit 4 candles, one at each cardinal point, their flames small and nervous in the damp air. From his pack, he removed a wooden box bound in red thread. Inside lay a small mirror of polished obsidian, its surface black as ink. "This is where she looks from," he murmured. The mirror felt cold, almost wet to the touch. He took a breath, steadying his voice. "Tonight, we end this." The old woman and 2 villagers stood behind him, clutching prayer beads, their faces lit by candlelight. "What must we do?" one asked. "Nothing," Lu said. "Do not speak her name. Do not look into the water. Whatever you hear, do not answer." He struck the bell. Its tone was soft but deep, spreading out like ripples through the fog. The sound seemed to touch the surface of the lake, and the lake responded. The water began to hum. He started the chant. Each syllable fell like a drop of rain on stone, precise, ancient, deliberate. He burned yellow talismans and tossed them into the basin. The smoke rose in spirals, gray turning red, the scent sharp with resin and blood. The reflection inside the basin shifted, flickering like an eye that refused to close. Then the wind changed. The candles flared blue. The mist turned thick, and the world became smaller, compressed into the radius of his voice. Somewhere deep under the chanting came another sound, faint like laughter caught in water. The old woman flinched. "Master Lu, do not speak," he warned. But the laughter grew louder, layered. It came from the lake, the trees, and then, impossibly, from inside the ground beneath them. The earth pulsed with every beat of the chant, as though something under it was listening. Lu's voice wavered. He took a breath, forced the next line through his teeth. The air shivered. The mirror in the basin began to bleed light. And then she rose. At first, she was only reflection, a face in the water, the veil trailing behind her like smoke. Then her form took shape above the basin, suspended in mist, red cloth rippling as though she were still underwater. Her eyes were open now, white, hollow, endless. "Lin Hua," Lu said, the name cracking in his throat. "I summon you to speak. You are bound to this place by false vows. Release yourself." Her head tilted slowly, like a marionette tugged by invisible strings. When she spoke, her voice was inside his skull. "You promised too," the old woman screamed. The villagers turned to run, but the fog moved before they could, rising, folding around them like walls. The world vanished into gray. Lu struck the bell again, harder. "Release the dead. Return to the mirror." The spirit smiled, or something like it. Her hand reached toward the basin, fingertips grazing the surface of the water. The reflection shattered outward, and the wind screamed. The candles exploded, salt scattered. The ritual circle broke. The ground beneath the priest split open with a sound like tearing flesh. Water surged up from the cracks, dark, cold, and full of whispering. Faces appeared in the rising flood, women in red veils, mouths open, their eyes blank mirrors. Lou backed away, chanting faster, his beads clacking like bones in his hands. The mist pulled at him, tugging his robe, wrapping around his legs like arms desperate for warmth. The water was climbing, rising as if the lake itself had decided to stand. "Master!" the old woman shouted. "She's coming out!" The priest turned. From the center of the lake, the bride was walking toward them. Her steps made no sound. Her dress floated, weightless, bleeding color into the fog. The surface beneath her feet didn't ripple. It hardened where she stepped, as if the lake wanted her to cross. Lou held up the obsidian mirror. The glass reflected her face. Half beauty, half rot. Her lips moved. "You left me in the water. Now you must keep your word." The mirror cracked down the middle. A rush of wind tore through the ritual site. The old woman was thrown backward, her body hitting the shrine wall. The candles went out. The air smelled of iron and lotus roots. Sweet, cloying, suffocating. Lou fell to one knee, gripping his staff. His voice strained against the rising hum of the dead. He shouted the binding sutra, a prayer not meant for human ears. Each line burned through the air like fire, but the spirit only tilted her head, watching him with eyes that reflected not his face, but his memory, the day he fled, the red-dressed girl waiting on the bridge, the promise he broke. He gasped, dropping the bell. The sound stopped. The whispers didn't. They grew louder, closer, so close he could feel breath on his ear. "Keep it. Finish it. Say it again." A hand burst from the basin, white and wet, gripping his wrist. The old woman screamed as the water pulled him down to his elbow. Lou shouted a final mantra, slamming the staff into the earth. The basin shattered. The reflection burst into shards of red light that scattered into the fog. Silence followed. The mist hung still. The candles reignited on their own, small and shaking. Lou knelt there, drenched, gasping. The spirit was gone. The lake was still. Then he noticed his hand. A mark was burned into his wrist. A red ring, like a wedding band seared into the flesh. He looked at it in horror. From the lake came a faint sound, the soft rustle of silk underwater, followed by a whisper, gentle and cruel. "Now you wear what you promised." The reflection of the lake rippled once more, showing two figures this time, the drowned bride in red, and beside her, him. The mark would not fade. By morning, the skin around Lou's wrist had swollen, bruised the color of old plum. The thin red ring shimmered faintly when touched by light, sometimes pale, sometimes wet, as if something beneath it breathed. He bound it in linen, but the fabric darkened from inside. When he washed his hands, the water trembled. He knew what that meant. The spirit had claimed him. To the villagers, he still looked composed, but the calm had become performance. Every sound now reached him doubled, one version above the surface, another echoing under it. The fog never lifted. It had settled into the streets like a second architecture. People whispered that the lake was rising again, that footprints filled with water hours after the walker passed, that every mirror showed faces with veils of red gauze. In the temple courtyard, Lou built a circle of salt and light. Inside it, he laid out 9 talismans and a bowl of oil. He stared into the flame, searching for the pulse between worlds. "Water remembers what the mouth forgets," he murmured. The candle guttered. From somewhere nearby came a faint tap, tap, tap. At first he thought it was the shutters in the wind. Then he heard it again, steady, deliberate, coming from behind him. He turned. The mirror on the wall was quivering. He approached carefully. His reflection lagged half a second behind his movement. He raised his hand. The reflection didn't. Instead, it smiled. "Enough," Lou whispered. The smile widened. Behind the reflection, the air rippled as if submerged. He saw flashes of red silk, wet hair, pale arms entwined. A faint sound emerged, soft humming, a wedding tune warped by distance. He smashed the mirror with his staff. Shards scattered, slicing his palm. The reflection in each piece lingered an instant too long before dying. From the broken glass came a single whisper, clear and almost tender. "When the mirror breaks, the water finds new glass." That night, he dreamed in water. He was standing on the lake, barefoot, the surface cold but solid beneath him. Around him floated lanterns, dozens of them, each carrying a single lotus flower. They pulsed gently, like heartbeats under skin. From the fog, shapes began to form. People he knew, faces from the village. Each one walking toward the center, each one smiling faintly as they vanished under the surface. He wanted to call out, but his mouth filled with water. He tasted iron and lotus root. Then he saw her, Lin Hua. Her red veil drifted behind her like blood in current. Her eyes were dark, not angry, just endless. She reached for him. "It's not death," she said softly. "It's keeping your word." When he woke, his lungs burned. His bed was soaked. A line of wet footprints led from the door to the window and disappeared into the fog outside. The next day, 3 villagers were found drowned in their own houses. No broken doors, no footprints. Each body lay face up, eyes open, mouths full of lotus petals. The old woman came running to Lou. "Master, the water's in the walls. The wells taste like metal. We hear her singing in the grain jars." He followed her to the house near the lake. Inside, the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy, damp. The walls glistened as though breathing. From the far corner came a faint drip, 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 but there was no leak. He pressed his ear to the wall. Behind it, someone was whispering. He promised and left me. He will come back through the mirror." He stumbled back, his heartbeat echoing the words. The red ring on his wrist burned so hot he smelled the skin sear. He tore off the bandage. The mark had spread, thin tendrils of red branching up his arm, pulsing faintly like veins drawing toward his heart. He sank to his knees. "She's binding me to the vow," he breathed. "The dead cannot rest until the promise is fulfilled, and the lake thinks I am the one who broke it." That night, the villagers gathered in the temple, clutching candles that hissed and wept wax. Lou stood before the altar, pale and trembling, but resolute. "If she seeks truth, she must be shown it," he said. "If she seeks the vow, I will finish it." The old woman frowned. "How can you finish a vow that killed her?" He looked toward the lake, where mist curled in shapes that almost resembled faces. "By going where it was made." He turned back to them. "Seal your doors before midnight. Cover every mirror. If you hear water, do not look." He stepped outside. The fog parted for him like breath on glass. The lake waited, black and still, reflecting nothing. He walked until the water lapped at his knees. It was warmer than it should have been, almost alive. He closed his eyes and whispered the words from the ancient charm. "To the mirror I return what was taken. To the water I keep what was promised." The surface trembled. A hand brushed his wrist, the same hand that had marked him. And for a heartbeat, he saw her face beneath the ripples, not vengeful, but sorrowful. Then she spoke, voice echoing from every direction, soft and final. "Then come." The lake swallowed the moonlight. The water rose around him like a curtain being drawn. He didn't struggle. The fog folded inward, and where he had stood, only ripples remained. The villagers said they heard a bell that night, one slow chime under the water, and then nothing. The night bled red. The fog had thinned, but only because the air itself had turned crimson. Not the color of flame, but of old wounds. It was as though the entire valley had been submerged in the bride's veil. The moon hid behind a cloud that did not move. At the water's edge, the villagers gathered in silence. They had not seen Master Lu since the night he walked into the lake. Yet now the bells had begun again. That thin, sharp sound that carried through the mist like metal scraping glass. Each ring came from the water, each one closer. Then they saw him. He walked out of the lake barefoot, robes clinging to his body, hair slick with silt. His skin was pale, veins dark under the surface. Around his wrist burned the red ring, glowing faintly, pulsing with each beat of the bell. No one dared speak. He looked neither alive nor dead. His eyes reflected light but did not blink. He stepped onto the shore and said only, "Prepare the altar." The villagers obeyed. Fear had long since turned to obedience. They laid out an altar on the old stone dock, a mirror of bronze now polished clean, 9 lotus flowers, pale and trembling in the cold air, a bowl of salt, a knife wrapped in red silk. Lu placed the knife at the center and began to chant, a low hum that made the air vibrate. His voice seemed to come from the lake itself. The villagers covered their ears, yet the sounds seeped through skin and bone. He sliced open his palm. The blood ran dark and thick. He let it drip into the basin until the water turned the color of wine. Then he lifted the mirror and angled it toward the sky. The reflection was not the moon. It was her. Lin Hua, the drowned bride, rising from the surface, veil floating around her like smoke underwater. Her face glowed faintly beneath the cloth, not ghostly now, but almost human. A bride remembering her name. She spoke, and her words came from the wind, from the lake, from the mirrors hidden in every home. "You kept your word, but every promise has a price." Lu bowed his head. "The blood is mine." He dipped his fingers into the basin, smearing his blood across the mirror's face, drawing the seal of return. 3 circles joined by a single line, the symbol of binding and release. The water stirred. Around the lake, the lotus lanterns began to light themselves, one by one, until the whole surface shimmered with trembling fire. The villagers fell to their knees, covering their eyes. The chant deepened. The red mark on Lu's wrist flared brighter, and his voice split. 2 tones overlapping, one his own, one hers. The living and the dead chanting as one. What was broken, bound again. What was drowned, remembered. What was promised, kept in blood. The wind rose, howling through the reeds. The mirror shook in his hand, its surface rippling. He looked into it and saw not his reflection, but both of them, the man and the bride, side by side, bound by the same red thread. She reached toward him from inside the glass. He pressed his wounded hand to meet hers. The glass did not resist. The surface folded like water, and his arm slid through. The villagers screamed. The lake erupted, a single column of water rising like a spine from the depths, twisting toward the sky. At its heart burned a red light, pulsing in rhythm with the bell's steady toll. The mirror shattered in his grip. Its shards spun upward, each catching a reflection of her face. Hundreds of them, circling, whispering, "Keep it, keep it, keep it." Blood poured from his palm, running in streams across the dock, tracing the trigrams and circles he had drawn days before. When the blood reached the lake, it spread outward, not dispersing, but forming a vast red circle that glowed beneath the surface. Lu's body began to shake violently. The villagers could hear his bones grind. His voice broke, then shifted, the words coming not from his mouth but from the air itself. The vow was complete. The mirror remembers. The water forgives. The red light pulsed once, then burst. A wave crashed outward, sweeping through the valley. The villagers fell to the ground, shielding their faces. The wind screamed, and the sound of 1,000 veils tore through the air. When the light faded, the lake was calm again. The lotus flowers floated gently, their flames steady and white. The water was no longer black. It reflected the stars for the first time in weeks. But Master Lu was gone. Only the knife remained, stuck upright in the dock, still dripping blood that would not dry. And from beneath the surface came a single sigh, soft, almost peaceful, followed by a whisper, carried gently to the shore. He kept his promise. For 3 nights the lake was silent. The villagers thought the storm had ended, that the offering had satisfied whatever lived beneath. But on the 4th night, the water turned silver. Not moonlight, silver, like the sheen of a blade. And beneath that metallic surface, something moved. The old woman was the first to see it. She had gone to the dock to pray, carrying a single lotus in her wrinkled hands. The night air was cold, but still, her reflection wavered on the surface, until another one appeared beside it. Not hers, a man in priest's robes. "Master Lu?" she whispered. The reflection turned. His face was calm, but his eyes were deep and pale. Not eyes at all, but small mirrors reflecting her own frightened face. He raised his hand, pointing not at her, but downward, to the water. The old woman followed his gesture and saw what lay beneath. The bottom of the lake was no longer mud and stone. It was architecture. Stone rings, stairs descending into darkness, and rows of figures carved into the bedrock. Women in wedding dresses, their faces turned upward, mouths open in silent song. Between them stood a single stone tablet, engraved with words long erased by silt. The old woman dropped her lotus. It hovered on the surface, spinning in place. Then she heard his voice, not from the reflection, but from within the water. The vow was not for love. It was a seal. She ran to the village temple at dawn. The monks refused to ring the morning bell. Every mirror had cracked overnight. The water in every bowl reflected only the lake. Even when they closed their eyes, the villagers saw its surface shimmering behind their eyelids, as if something was trying to remember itself through their dreams. In the temple's archives, Lu's handwriting had appeared in soot across the walls. His script, the same he'd used in ritual, 9 lines of it. The old woman traced them, her fingers black with ash. The mirror was forged to hold the lake's hunger. Each generation fed it with vows, not blood. But when the vow was broken, it awoke. It took the liar first. Then those who witnessed and said nothing. The last oath-bearer must return what was stolen. I have done so. The seal will not last. The water remembers names. At sunset, the villagers saw the sky reflected in the lake again, for the first time. It was beautiful and wrong, because the stars above and the stars in the water didn't match. The reflection had more, and they were moving. They gathered at the shore, staring, whispering prayers they half remembered. Then from the shallows the first body rose, not decayed, not drowned, perfectly preserved, her red veil floating around her like mist. Her eyes were closed, her hands folded around a lotus stem. Then another body surfaced beside her, then another. Dozens, then hundreds. All brides. Their dresses were different ages, Qing, Ming, even older. But each bore the same red thread at the wrist. The lake was giving them back. And between them, faint as candlelight, the reflection of Master Lu walked, or something that looked like him. He moved slowly, reverently, touching each body's forehead, murmuring to each in turn. The sound carried over the water, a prayer, a lullaby, a farewell. When the last bride's veil settled, he looked toward the shore. His voice reached the villagers, dry, distant, but clear. They were promised peace, not sacrifice. The water shimmered brighter. The old woman fell to her knees, weeping. "Our fathers lied," he continued. "They built this village on a pact, a bride each generation to seal the lake. Each vow bound the living to the dead. When love replaced duty, the pact cracked." He raised his hand. The red mark on his wrist glowed through the reflection. "I gave what they took, but the mirror cannot hold forever." The surface of the water began to fracture, light spreading from the center outward like veins of fire under glass. The brides sank slowly, their veils dissolving into red mist. The reflection of Lou faded with them, smiling faintly as he whispered something too soft to hear. Then came the sound, a low hum, like the world exhaling. The light vanished, the lake stilled. Only one thing remained floating on the surface, a lotus flower, white now, unstained. Inside its petals lay the broken half of Lou's jade token. The villagers retrieved it and placed it in the temple beside his staff. That night, the water reflected the true sky again, calm, perfect, infinite. But those who stood long enough by the shore said they could still see faint figures moving beneath, like shadows dancing behind glass. And if you leaned close enough to the surface, if your breath fogged it just slightly, the mist would form words that faded as quickly as they appeared. The water is quiet, for now. The air smelled clean for the first time in weeks. The fog had lifted, leaving the valley sharper, almost too bright. The villagers said the sunlight looked new, as if someone had wiped the dust from heaven. The willows swayed lazily. The lake lay still. The water's surface was smooth enough to trick birds into diving at their own reflections. The nightmare had ended. At least that's what they told one another. By morning, the fishermen returned to the shore. They lowered their nets with care, whispering short prayers before each cast. For the first time, the nets came up heavy, with fish, not flesh. They laughed and wept at the same time, the sounds sharp and brittle. Children ran through the fields again. The temple bell rang at dawn and dusk. The villagers repaired the dock, replanted lotus along the bank, and left offerings of salt and rice, not out of fear now, but gratitude. No one said her name. No one said his. At dusk, the old woman walked alone to the shore. She carried a single candle and the broken jade token. Its surface glinted faintly in the fading light, as if something beneath it still breathed. She knelt at the water's edge, the hem of her robe brushing the surface. The candle's reflection wavered in the lake, flickering twin flames across the veil between worlds. "Rest," she whispered. "All debts are paid." The water did not answer, but as she turned to leave, a ripple spread from where her hand had touched. It moved outward, slow and deliberate, until it reached the center of the lake, then vanished, swallowed by stillness. That night, the dreams began. The villagers dreamt of weddings, faceless brides walking through corridors of water, holding lanterns that never went out. In every dream, the same voice whispered, "Keep your promises." Some woke with tears on their faces. Some woke with the taste of salt on their tongues. One man woke with his feet wet, though he slept far from the lake. A week later, the old woman returned to the temple to replace the candle at the altar. The air inside smelled faintly of lotus and iron. The knife from the dock still stood upright in the center of the room. Its blade was clean now, but the red silk around its handle had not rotted. In front of it sat the cracked bronze mirror. Someone had placed a new offering beside it. 3 white lotus blossoms. She frowned. No one had entered the temple since the sealing. When she looked closer, she saw her own reflection in the mirror. Tired, lined, familiar. Then slowly, the reflection blinked. She hadn't. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the lotus leaves. The lake rippled once, then stilled again, perfectly flat. For a moment it reflected nothing at all. Not sky, not trees, not light. Only depth. And deep within that mirrored blackness, something stirred. Not movement, but awareness. Faint and patient, like the first thought after waking. The lake exhaled. The candle in the temple flickered and went out. When the villagers came the next morning, they found the temple doors open. The old woman was gone. Only her rosary remained, floating on the lake beside a single white lotus. The water was calm, too calm. They closed the doors, burned incense, and prayed once more. But that night when the moon rose, its reflection on the lake was veiled, faintly red, and from somewhere below, almost imperceptible, came a soft, rhythmic sound, a heartbeat, steady as the toll of a distant bell. I arrived 3 days after the final ripple vanished. The locals didn't speak to me at first. They just watched, hollow-eyed, from behind half-closed doors. Every surface in the village smelled faintly of lotus, the kind of scent that feels alive. The lake was smaller than I expected. From the reports, I'd imagined something vast, but it was just a quiet mirror ringed by reeds. Still, when I stood by its edge, I felt a pressure behind my ribs, as though something beneath the surface was trying to breathe through me. They said the priest walked into the water and never came back. They said the lake stopped whispering afterward, but no one believed it was over. Not really. The temple was still intact. The door was open. Inside, dust hung like fog. Someone had drawn the bagawa on the floor in ash, still fresh enough to smudge under my boot. At the center stood a mirror, cracked into 9 pieces but refusing to fall apart, the way broken bone sometimes knits wrong. The smell of burned incense lingered, though there were no embers left. On the altar lay an old knife, wrapped in red silk. Its blade was spotless. I don't know why, but when I touched it, it felt warm, like skin. There was a phrase carved into the handle, faded, almost erased by time and fingers. To keep a vow is to drown quietly. I wrote it down. Then I realized my handwriting trembled. The villagers told me pieces of the story, each more hesitant than the last. A wedding, a broken promise, a lake that remembers lies. They said Master Lu gave his blood to seal it, that he walked into the reflection instead of the water. They said the mirror took him back to wherever promises go to rot. When I asked if they still dream of the lake, no one answered, but a child, maybe 7, pointed at my reflection in the window and said, "She likes you." I didn't ask which she. That night, I camped by the shore. I don't know why. Maybe to see if it would look back. The surface stayed still for hours. Not a breath of wind, not a ripple. Then around midnight, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tap, 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 like fingers on glass. I leaned closer. The reflection was mine at first. Then it wasn't. A red veil spread across the surface, slowly, like blood through clear water. A face appeared under it, pale, calm, eyes open but unreadable. She wasn't angry. She looked tired, and she was mouthing something. I couldn't hear, but I could feel the words inside my skull, heavy as water. "Keep it." I fell backward. The mirror of the lake shuddered once and went still. My wrist burned, a bright, sharp heat. When I rolled up my sleeve, there it was, a faint red ring, thin as thread. It faded before I could photograph it. I wish it hadn't. The report will say containment successful, entity dormant, environmental stability restored. But the truth is, the mirror still answers. When I close my eyes, I dream of water running backward. I see the priest standing beside the bride, both motionless, both looking up toward me. Sometimes I wake with the taste of iron on my tongue and the sound of a bell still echoing in my chest. It's quiet now, too quiet, the kind of quiet that listens. I've sealed my findings and left the site. Before I boarded the train, I filled a small vial with water from the lake. Routine sample, standard protocol. On the ride home, I held it against the window and watched the reflection. The water shimmered once, though the train didn't move. And just before the dawn light broke, something inside the vial smiled. End of investigator's log. File 7C0199. The Mirror Bride. Personal note. Unfiled. The water no longer ripples when the wind blows. I think it's waiting for someone to make another promise.